Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our fall Zube lecture series 2020. I'm Frank Sliegers. I'm organizing the Zube lecture series. I'm taking over from Jack Ahern, who served for many years putting together great and meaningful talks, and we thank Jack Ahern for his great service. We worked hard to put this series together. And we're very hard working the series together, and we organized a great fall schedule with 13 presenters. But first I want to also thank some people who helped. Nathan Chung, who is always in the background. He helped creating a beautiful poster, and Nathan and also Stacy helped organizing this. And we also have very relevant topics. Are you hearing me? Okay.
Yes.
So we have also relevant, we did a lot of rescheduling, and we have some speakers who will talk and respond to the actual situation of COVID-19 and also to topics of social justice. So please stay tuned. And maybe Nathan, can you display the poster for the series? Yeah, here we go. Also announced in September, Kofi Bone. He's our Bridge Scholar, and he's a minority person. He talks to issues of landscape architecture. So thank you, Nathan. And now we'll give it over to Robert Ryan, who is hosting today's Zube lecture series.
Great, thank you, Frank. It's wonderful to be here, even if we're virtual, because some people who couldn't drive to Amherst are here to join us, so I can see you, some of you in the audience, which is wonderful. So I'd like to, again, thank Frank for help organize the series, for Chris Ramage and Nathan for putting the poster together, for Stacy and Kelly in the office behind the scenes. I would like to introduce our first speaker. The department is so thrilled to have Samantha Solano joining our faculty this year. She has a master's of landscape architecture from the Harvard Graduate School of Design, Harvard University. She also has a bachelor's in landscape architecture from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. She has over 5 professional years of experience in landscape architecture firms and is currently the principal of Juxtopos, a research and experimental design firm. And their webpage is juxtopos.com. I encourage you to check out her webpage and some of the work, creative work there. Her innovative research and professional work centers on urban ecological design in arid landscapes. And she looks through the lens of climate change resiliency, as well as equitable design and practice in landscape architecture. She's incredibly creative, the work she's done with her students in the past when she was a professor at University of Nevada, Las Vegas before coming here. And we're excited for the work she's going to do here at UMass. Samantha really is an emerging voice in issues related to diversity and inclusion in the profession of landscape architecture. And she's the leader of the group Visualizing Equity in Landscape, the VILA project. Today, we're thrilled to have her talk about and kick off our Zube lecture series for 2020 with her talk entitled Landscapes Unrepresented. Please give a wonderful, warm UMass welcome to Samantha Solano.
Thank you so much. It's so, different being virtual and trying to gauge the audience. So thank you for the virtual class. It helps for sure. I'm just going to start sharing my screen right now. Let's see. All right. And can you all see this? My front screen. Perfect.
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all for, first of all, hiring me and welcoming me to the University of Amherst. I'm super excited to, start my journey here and be a part of the amazing cohorts of academics and students coming through the program. It's been an interesting transition, obviously moving here amidst a global pandemic, but I am so happy that now I am in Massachusetts, in Northampton, actually living here. and enjoying all of this beautiful landscape has to offer. So today I'm going to share with you some research in progress and research done. I'm interested in the unrepresented landscape, the forgotten, the misunderstood, and the blurry space that occurs between the margins of what we know and what we accept. Building upon established theories, research, and practices of landscape architecture, my work re-examines their connections through the lens of the marginalized. Using various methods of cartographic representation and analysis, I aim to reveal the hidden spatialities that emerge from this recontextualization and focus on the voided landscape. In both my teaching and research, I primarily explore the relationships between overlooked peoples and their designed places, undervalued territories and their climatic urgencies, and repressed landscape practices and their stories. I cannot start today's lecture on landscapes unrepresented without acknowledging landscapes that are unrepresented and peoples unrepresented in where we stand. With that said, I want to first acknowledge that we stand on the lands of the Nipmuc, and I apologize if I mispronounce any of these nations, the Nipmuc, Hokumuktuk, and Wabanaki Confederacy, and that these unsurrendered, unceded lands were stolen by colonizer regimes, and that these peoples were extirpated by our namesake, Lord Jeffrey Amherst. What I want to share with you today are a series of provocations based on my work to visualize the landscapes and narratives unrepresented. These are 3 themes for which I at least hope one of them will be exciting for you, if not all. And I'm sharing my questions, my concerns that I am personally taken up with the profession of landscape architecture today. In order to interrogate these themes, I have adopted mapping as an essential methodology in my research and design. It has become my passion and intent to build upon theories of mapping in landscape architecture, to develop myself as a thinker, as a tester of different modalities of cartographic representation and processes. As James Corner states, mapping is a creative practice that is about uncovering hidden realities and speculating on alternative readings. As a cultural act that draws geographical relationships between biophysical and anthropogenic systems, mapping has served as a critical form of research-based site documentation to drive site-based design decisions. We are in a climate of crisis that extends beyond basic understandings of site. We are also in a data-driven rich era where the proliferation of information has allowed us to quickly visualize and comprehensively understand complex urban and environmental information. I believe that this explosive expansion of mapping practice requires a redefinition, recategorization, and a critique through the lens of landscape architecture. And with this mindset and framework in place, I would like you to look through that lens at the following work that I will be sharing with you. Largely, when we think of landscape, we think of rolling green, lush, temperate, wet places, right? That offer us a stable, conformed view of our world. Approaches to landscape hinge on the picturesque, where green is supreme. The cultural appropriation of this cultural appropriation of land has left us with a singular view of landscape in terms of ecological acceptance and importance. The arid, the desert, the landscapes lacking water have yet to be critically evaluated by designers and respected by planners, developers, officials, and society. The global arid landscape, because of these homogenizing methods of cartographic representation and understanding, have been misunderstood and simplified into classifications such as barren, open, void, wasteland, etc. These reductive representations have reduced this diverse, rich landscape into territories that are prime for urban operations that exploit its vacancy and its fragility. How we choose to map represents what is to be valued. Within their arid, there is a vast wilderness and expansive processes of urbanization. It is a landscape that exemplifies human ingenuity and extreme fragility, as said. However, the misguided interventions that aim to reform the arid into oases, specifically like Las Vegas, where I come from, right, into landscapes that are lush, fertile, green, and saturated, have failed to understand the complexities, systems, and processes that make it unique and powerful to its ecologies. The threats of rapid urbanization and climate change reveal an overall global unreadiness. But with current global initiatives that are preparing for these uncertainties, we as designers are focusing on defending the coasts and while fighting our deserts, fighting this rich ecological resource as it stands. Therefore, through a series of critical cartographies of the arid that maps patterns of occupation and ecological value, my research aims to bring awareness and urgency to the issues impacting current and future arid landscape interventions. For example, 30% of our terrestrial landmass is designated as global drylands and hosting a population of approximately 38% of the world's people, right? The project tests, this project is a test ground for the idea of a retracing, of a re-representing to reveal hidden opportunities of the arid and for which we have previously overlooked. For example, like most people don't know that 30% of productive agricultural land occurs within the arid, semi-arid, and dry subhumid regions. 30%. If we take that for granted, we are dismissing a critical resource of the global landscape. As a profession, discourse surrounding climate change is largely focused on the coasts. The wet, saturated landscapes as if those are the only places that need attention. It is also testament that in landscape architecture, ideas and practice in the arid desert regions do not reach the same status of critical engagement. My quarrel with landscape architecture that does occur in the deserts is that the interventions and ways that to interface with the desert remain small and largely concerned with native planting regimes and water conservation strategies. And they do not engage with the desert's ecological territory and the systems depend upon it. Landscape architecture in the desert is purely aesthetic, and strategies are not being envisioned to think of this new climatology that will outpace the critical coastal projections. To bring this future into focus, our preconditions and motivations for design must be reconsidered and recontextualized. The open, dynamic, connected landscapes become the method to reinvent our cities and the relationship with the territory. By remapping and extracting new narratives to describe the areas of the world that are mismanaged and ignored, we can disrupt the status quo, transform the discussion, and give attention to all landscapes equally. The world's drylands have been experiencing significant population growth over the past 40 years. The large urban centers and supporting hinterlands face growing economic, social, and environmental challenges. Between 1980 and 2020 alone, 454 new arid urban centers were registered by the United Nations in 40 years. And 3 cities have exceeded a population size of 10 million. As climates and resources shift, so will the most vulnerable populations. To anticipate the complex dynamics and growing challenges of the urban drylands, and therein the anticipated multilateral investments to address them, my work ultimately discusses the urgency of landscape architecture to re-enter territorial and regional framework planning, also infrastructure investment planning, land development processes, and resource management regimes at the formative stages. Within the margins of the most vulnerable arid geographies, it is important to speculate on opportunities for professional and academic sectors to re-enter the discussion and consider the urgency to pay attention to the future global drylands. This is being developed currently with my partner Thomas Niederost on a book proposal where we are looking to reframe the arid as the next frontier, speculating on landscape architecture's role in that process. These processes will equip future urbanists with strategies to design through gradients, right, between the coasts and the arid, between the wet and the dry, not as singular entities. Therefore, looking to the landscape for solutions structured around a new inclusive, represented territorial resiliency. The next project and focus of representation or unrepresentation that I would like to share with you is my work with the Visualizing Equity in Landscape Architecture project. Started last summer on my couch with online on Zoom with a friend at FIU University, TJ Marson. We have been vigorously working on representing women throughout the landscape architecture profession. It has been over 20 years since the last study on women in the profession was reported. With the resurgence of women-based initiatives and research populating mainstream discourse channels, the timeliness of where we stand as women in landscape architecture is imperative. In 1973, Darwina Neal, the first female president of ASLA, prepared a premier report on women in the landscape architecture profession. Since then, there have only been a handful of studies documenting women's careers in both the academy and within practice. In landscape architecture, women dominate in academic narratives. For example, winning the most awards, more women are winning Olmsted scholarships, or even student design awards, the more women are winning, and also obtaining more degrees. But this momentum and representation drastically dissipates as women enter the workforce and navigate through their professional careers. Sampled data from CLARB reports that 27% of licensed landscape architects in 2018 were women. What's happening to the other graduates who are not making it here? Only 23% of women have won prestigious awards through the ASLA since 1971. 9% of design and project awards since 1981 were led by women. And the timeline on the bottom reveals that the numbers haven't increased over time. And even as recently as 2016, there were zero women winners in the design categories. And we've only seen 10 female presidents since this is Council Fellows. We've only seen 16% of inducted fellows have been women, and only 10 have been female presidents in the ASLA. So the question is, where does this leave us now, right? With this burgeoning pool of emerging professionals entering the workforce, are we supporting women to be successful as they navigate their professional trajectories? Have we made significant strides in the past 20 years with those previous reports? Have we learned from them? Or are we facing similar limitations as they did then? Our primary question that TJ and I are asking is of value. Through this inquiry, we can start to pinpoint critical concerns that impact the growth of female cohorts throughout the various stages in the profession. by focusing on the experiential aspects as well as the data-driven aspects, we can span across sectors of practice, and we can begin to acknowledge and understand how to enact systemic change throughout the entire experience of being a landscape architect for men and for women. I would like to acknowledge WXLA, shown here, the women and men who have been supporting the VILA project and have given TJ and I a platform to share the work through greater audience. Completely grateful for their leadership and their support. And they are also championing, I can't say the word today, championing women through scholarship opportunities at the ASLA. So if you're not plugged into WXLA, please go to their website, their Instagram, whatever social media platform, and look deeper into the work that they are doing, because it's absolutely groundbreaking and super important today. So I would like to, again, thank them. One of the last projects that I want to share with you is a project that was developed for a CELA conference and has been starting to snowball into many other opportunities and reaching further and further opportunities to research design in the practice of what we acknowledge as important landscapes. How do we recognize distinguished landscapes through awards, right? So this research started as a comparative spatial analysis of the ASLA's annual professional awards from 1981 to 2018. The research surveys 955 projects across the globe since 1981 in the general, residential, and analysis and planning categories. And this is just, this graphic here is just showing you all the different projects that I single-handedly mapped in Google Earth. It was a lot of pain, like a lot of nights of just sitting there mapping all these projects. But what was interesting is it started to reveal a spatiality to these awards. Rather than you just seeing them on the website as these singular images and money shots of these awards, we can start to see densities, relationships, etc. start to emerge. And what I love about this is what I hope to bring this project into is almost like a landscape architecture database where you could just really zoom in to these different projects and also explore their contexts and their relationships onto themselves, right? So each project, and really quickly, this also led into the work of the VILA project, because I started to map also the not just the projects themselves, but the people and the firms who were winning these projects. So each project I looked at is comparatively mapped against, again, its location, its project type, ecological region. I'm working currently, and I'll show you some in the process behind the books work of populations, demographics. I'm also looking at future climatic and growth projections to really uncover this, again, spatial narrative of recognized landscape architecture. With the challenges today, revealing where distinguished landscape architecture occurs provides a guide for future catalyzation and agency in urgent and unrepresented landscapes, right? What are we not focusing on, right? So by representing them, we can reveal the unrepresentation. Currently, this is my project in the book, so it's really raw and hasn't been released or graphically made pretty yet. But what I'm currently working on is looking at the underrepresented peoples and their landscapes through mapping demographic census tracts. I know there's a lot of issues when we talk about all the aspects of mapping through census tracts, but at this scale, this is where I can work at. So currently, I've been mapping the minority-majority census tracts across the United States and looking at, for example, where Blacks are the majorities, where Hispanics are the majorities, indigenous majority census tracts, and then we have the margins where we have blends of these, right? So basically what you are seeing is wherever whites are not the majority throughout the United States. And as an overlay, I was like, well, thinking about, well, where are landscape architecture recognized projects happening in relationship to these census tracts? And are these populations have access to recognized landscape architecture, or what is that? Do we classify as that? And currently 25% of ASLA awards are occurring within these minority majority census tracts. And again, we can start to see, you know, through this re-representation of unrepresentation, right? I can start to pull out these micro narratives, right? So for example, here in San Francisco, the majority of ASLA awards have been granted, and I wanted to see, well, okay, let's zoom in now and actually look at the demographic makeup against the different projects. And what this map actually reveals is that the projects, 69% of the awards are located within predominantly white neighborhoods. And there is only one project in a Hispanic neighborhood, and it is an open space and planning study. It's not actually a designed place. It's not actually a physical landscape. And 2 projects are in African-American neighborhoods, where one is a master plan for public housing redevelopment, and the other was a waterfront park project master plan to gentrify the area. Now I want to go in deeper into these micro narratives and see were these projects or planning studies realized, and did they affect the area pre-award or before they were implemented and post, right? And looking at, are these projects inclusive? Are they exclusive? Are they catalysts for things such as gentrification and what have you? So this is currently where this research is moving into, and it's actually quite exciting. So if anyone wants to join me in mapping all these projects, I would love that. Yeah, so representing landscape is about just finding those, for me, it's about finding those hidden narratives, those things that we know are there, but through mapping and through data, revealing them in a graphic, digestible way, and to bring power to these conversations. I believe right now in landscape architecture, we are witnessing a much overdue reformation. You know, our climate, our planet, the livelihoods of 7.8 billion people, hundreds of billions of species require us to be actively fighting for change. You know, the work in progress right now, what is being led by the McCarg Center at UPenn to ideate, designing a Green New Deal, and this nationwide super studio, I think is really exciting. So if you haven't heard of the super studio or looked into this nationwide agenda, you should look it up. And Designing the Green New Deal Super Studio, it's something that we all can be a part of and start to think about how we move design into the next era. You know, the profession and the academy must also make changes and acknowledge history's erased, people's erased, landscapes stolen. And the work by OPSIS, also check them out, is doing just that. We must interrogate all grounds, demap, unmap, remap, re-represent the landscapes we think we know, right? The erasure of Seneca Village from our prized Central Park landscape is a testament to that. But it is not the only one, and it is time for us to find and unearth and excavate them all. Recent events, as we all know, are shaking up our political, social, cultural arenas, and it is a momentous time that requires us not to step back, but to push forward intentionally, rigorously, and informed. right? It's amazing to me that students are the ones that are stepping up to our profession and responding boldly to things that they are unhappy with and requiring change. As for example, this slide here that's showing ASLA adapts open letter to ASLA on their statement on Black Lives Matter. And it goes through a whole manifesto of immediate actions that we are requiring the landscape architecture profession to contend with. In my opinion, our profession has favored the mainstream, the comfortable, the colonial, the narratives produced by white men. What we have learned and seen thus far has been curated. As emerging landscape architecture students and professionals, you have the agency to sculpt the future lens for which landscape architecture must engage with. You have the power to demand an education that aligns with the now and with the future. Again, a reformation, a realignment, a refocus, a re-representation of what is required to bring our practice and our contributions in the precarious world that we live in right now into the next era. Landscapes represented. Thank you.
Wonderful. That was incredible, Samantha.
Oh, well, thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you. We've got lots of time for questions from the audience for you.
Yeah, I probably went really fast, but I'm sorry, I apologize.
Great. So I think if folks want to raise their hand, Nathan will connect. You can unmute yourself and have questions.
Oh, and before we do that, should we unshare your screen, Professor Solano?
Yeah, yes.
It's the red, okay, great. Actually, let's see, we can try just letting people unmute themselves. I gave people the authority.
Okay.
Now assuming like 20 people don't speak at the same time. We can try that, right?
It's always fun in Zoom.
I have a question.
Do they pop up when they, okay, yeah, so there you go.
Hi, so yeah, I know you were talking about the lack of projects in minority areas, especially in like San Francisco. And then you mentioned the gentrification project along the coast in an African-American district. Do you think those type of projects would be beneficial or harmful depending on how they did it due to gentrification being an issue in those areas?
That's something I definitely cannot really quantify or codify if it's harmful or beneficial, right? I think it goes back to how we as landscape architects are engaging with the community, right? And how we are responding to the needs of what people are asking for and giving them the voice to be a part of the projects, right? And like I said, this analysis is at a very superficial top aerial view, right? And I haven't had the opportunity to really get down and see the nitty gritty of what's actually happening on the ground. And I think that's the next critical point, a part of this analysis, to see these claims that I'm making, are they actually what is being revealed from this super high level analysis? But again, I think there's always how do you have that balance of like, okay, having a project in a maybe in a neighborhood, how do you balance the impact, right? And that's, I think, something here within your education, you'll learn a lot of tools of how to do that. So I don't want to say if it's better or worse, because that's a trap for me too.
No, yeah,
so
yeah. I was just wondering if you thought like there are some good ways to include gentrification, but like in a good way. But I guess that's also pretty complicated question.
No, but great question. Thank you. No, thank you for that. Something to consider and to think about as you are, whatever part of design you're emerging with is how is this really impacting it, your community, really, right? So, and looking at similar projects and seeing how they have impacted the community in which ways, right? And then you can start to build up this, you know, robust toolbox of what works and what doesn't.
Can I ask a question?
Of course. Hi, Henry.
Hi. I thought your visualizations were completely stunning. I could spend probably hours picking your brain on, you know, the different software platforms that you like using, and, you know, just kind of tapping into the way that you know, have obviously carefully, you know, kind of done a lot of very good, I think, data analysis at multiple scales, and thought very much about the communication of that information as, you know, kind of as a central tenet in the analysis. I was blown away. So, and I don't want to get too technical, but I'm curious. So I was really drawn in by a lot of your different projects that you're working on, but I think the one that sticks most in my mind is the one where you're analyzing the spatial distribution of recent awards and kind of overlaying that with, you know, the different kind of minority majority census tracts around the country. And I know that I think you said that this is a work in progress. And so I thought it, but even just kind of looking at the maps that you've made, it's pretty obvious to me that, you know, that there's some pretty strong first and second order spatial processes going on. And, you know, for instance, you know, that some of the patterns seem to follow general population density. So that would be the first order process. But it seems like there's a lot of, I think the best way to describe it is spatial homogeneity. You know, that, and I know that this is kind of what you're trying to get to in a lot of your work, and that can be really tricky to measure.
No,
so
yeah.
I'm wondering, kind of going forward, what are your thoughts on that? You know, like it's very much of like a birds of a feather tend to prefer the landscapes that they're used to kind of phenomena that's going on, right? I mean, to a certain extent.
That's a really difficult thing for me to kind of answer, I guess. I would love to actually pick your brain more and get into some more how I can also start to reveal at a deeper sense this homogeneous landscape and these place attachments. And I mean, there's so many levels of data that are required to really tell these whole stories, right? Like, it's not just a layer in GIS, right? I think this is where I'm grappling with how do I embed those other unrepresented narratives of space and of landscape at that scale. And I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but these are some questions that I have for myself. Yeah,
I think it's, you know, that's very similar to the kind of questions that came up when I was looking at it. So it, you know, that's fine. No, but I just, you know, kind of applaud you on your work going forward. I think you're such a great addition to our faculty here. I wasn't able to make your talk last time, but even then, when I looked at the maps in the recorded version, you kind of blew me away. So welcome to LARP.
Henry.
Thanks for giving the talk, and we'll chat once you're, you know, once you're settled in and everything like that.
Yeah. Thank you, Henry. Thank you.
No problem.
Oh, and we have a question from Amanda Rookie. And I guess I'll read it. It seems like
is it in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Oh.
Or you can actually, take a look and you can.
Okay.
Oh, there she is.
Hi there.
Yeah, you want to just ask it? That'd be better.
I will. I'll ask
Okay.
it. Hi, Samantha. I'm a graduate of the UMass program 2014. I'm currently in Reno, Nevada, and I spent 2.5 years in Las Vegas. So I was excited to see your CV and hear that you've joined the staff. So welcome, and it's really great. And I wanted to ask, I recently sat in on a presentation about the rewilding of our spaces that are kind of within the public realm. So we have areas like parks that are not being used, and maybe those cities no longer have the funding, right, to continue to keep up the maintenance of those park spaces. And so how do we, as landscape architects, educate the public about the rewilding of those spaces, and what does rewilding mean for the arid environments? And I saw your work, you know, in Las Vegas, and I really enjoy the overlay of GIS. And I'm wondering, you know, how does this connect, and what does the rewilding mean, and how do we educate our public about that concept using native plants and native species?
I mean, I think this is the
kind of a big question.
Yeah, it's okay. I think this is part of the problem of generalizing some terms like rewilding, for example, might be fine here in this in where I am now, the ecology of the Northeast, and to apply those same principles to a completely different ecological profile, such as deserts in the arid, you would have to do some type of, if you wanted it aesthetically to be the same, as pleasing as it is here, right, you would have to do some major interventions and things like that. And so this is kind of how my thought process is. I think we need to change the perception of what we think of deserts and arid in landscape architecture, and it's not complementary, it's not on the same page as other landscapes, and we can't apply those same principles equally. But I think we need to be able to, first, as landscape architects in these regions, understand the entire ecological profile through beyond a site, right? Looking at systems, looking at the territory and how these are connected. And I think my work, how I would think that we as landscape architects need to interface in the wild is beyond the site specific, and that our interventions actually need to occur at this regional planning framework scale. So to say how you rewild sites in the arid, I don't know. But I think we also have to just change our perceptions of taking concepts from other landscapes and trying to apply them to the desert. That makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
So kind of going off what you just finished with. So like from your new teacher to the department, most of what we're taught in terms of design is to draw inspiration for things like you mentioned, like the colonial style, the more formal stuff that we're taught in school, or just like history classes and things like that. And so often when we're like given something that doesn't fit those specific criteria, we just think it's not a good design. We just look past it really quick. So I'm just wondering, like, for the teachers, how are you guys approaching, or at least starting to think about this, how to look at different landscapes that it's not the formal. You mentioned Central Park and Seneca Village. Why is it that we learn, I mean, Central Park's beautiful, but we spent a whole week on it, and Seneca Village is not something that was ever mentioned. Like, I recently found out about it, so I was like, that's kind of crazy. So how you guys, I know things can't be implemented right away. So how is that thought process starting to develop amongst like the different teachers?
Is that for me?
Yeah, that's a you question. Like, how are you guys thinking about that? Like, okay, I'm new to here, like kind of new field. How am I gonna start to like at least incorporate some of these things that I'm thinking in like my immediate teaching, so things start to change like now instead of like being implemented later on?
Well, I mean, I think I bring just that, that I am resistant to the status quo, and through my teaching, it's just, you have to explore these topics in the class through just showing it, right? And having alternative readings, and maybe not reading the typical theorists that we're all used to, and bringing in new voices, new emerging voices, or voices that have not been represented in landscape architecture, but have had agency in developing what this profession is about. And I think it's not only the instructor's responsibility. I think also as students, you guys have to demand it and also look into it yourselves, because it's generations of thinking that cannot just be overturned in, maybe not even in a semester, a year, or several years. It's going to take time to be more inclusive to these alternative readings of landscape. And if you ask for it, and you bring something, new to the table that you have found, and I think there's a lot of resources, and maybe we could start this, right, of these emerging, voices. We can start to, compile this database of these things that you guys can start to interface with, and then it will percolate. But it does take initiative on both parties to bring that. That makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of like starting to reprogram how we think and like.
Absolutely. I mean, just look at what's going on in this country. We all have to reprogram how we think, right? So it's yeah. Okay, I won't go there.
Hi, Samantha. This is Chris Pritchard.
Hi, Chris.
And nice to see you. Congrats on the UMass move.
Thank you.
Congrats to UMass. So I'm the Director of Education and Accreditation at ASLA National, and thank you, UMass, for putting this on. I've seen some of your work through the Vela Project and the work around the awards, the ASLA National Awards. I definitely want to try to get you connected with the awards committee, because they need to hear and see this work themselves and understand the impact or lack thereof. One of the issues that when I do bring this issue up from what I've seen over some of your work is that the committee only looks at the projects that get submitted as part of the awards process. That's it. They can't go out and find projects in areas that are underrepresented. They only judge the things that are submitted. So I guess the question is, and something we're trying to figure out, is how do we get more projects that are in areas underrepresented, or projects that affect underrepresented communities, to be an increase in the number of projects that are submitted.
Yeah.
And I think a myth that needs to be, well, I don't know if it's a myth or not, but I think some people think that you have to have a perfect project that is the best and most beautiful in order to win. And I think that's not necessarily the case. And I think there's obviously ways that you could show impact and things. So I guess you or others, just any ideas around how we can get more projects submitted so that they can be more representative?
I mean, maybe if it's even just like a specific category as well, that is specific to maybe even, I don't know, like a certain locales. I don't know how you do that. I think also, like you were saying, the debunking the myth of applying, right? If there was like a statement that was made about the awards and misconceptions, and just kind of speaking to the larger community of who's winning. And it's hard because, you know, I see it too. There's trends in who wins these awards, and you can see in the firms, it's the same firms winning a lot. And I think it's great that the ASLA has the new Emerging Professionals Award, right? So that you can start to include the narratives that aren't being represented. But I think to get more I think what would be really awesome, if it's not a part of an award database, would be to also just acknowledge, like, people can submit their projects just to build a database of landscape architecture projects, right? So, and not even giving it a value, but just us to understand as a whole, like, where is design happening? That could be pretty cool. I would like to do that.
Samantha, you just gave me the perfect opening. I'm Gretchen Rubinkin. I'm Executive Director of the BSLA, the Boston chapter of ASLA, which is actually the Massachusetts and Maine chapter of ASLA. So I am thrilled that you're now in our chapter. Welcome.
Yay.
And that's exactly it. Like, we would love, you know, we've been talking about this, and I see many folks on this call who've been talking about this as well locally, about how we really expand, first we analyze and question and then expand the definition of what our awards categories are to be more inclusive. And that sort of analysis that you're doing on the national level, I'd love to work with you in doing it on our, regional level as well.
Yeah. I mean,
and I had my camera off
great.
because I'm like literally going through our old field books and counting contributors of color, like to see who's been in our publications so far, because we're challenging that this time. But we thought we need to start actually with that data too.
I mean, that would be, I would love to be a part of something like this. And I mean, and it's good because the scale is much more digestible, right, than the entire, all of the ASLA awards. And then we could really start to do this like secondary field work analysis into some of these projects and documenting them. So let's be in touch.
I know where to find you.
Yes.
And
I'm definitely not leaving my house. So
welcome. I'm so glad you're part of LARP.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And we have a question from Molly in the chat box.
Oh, that's a very good question. Molly asks, how many of these arid landscapes have been ecologically altered by colonialism? Does that have to be undone before effective regional arid design is successful? Well, I would say, I mean, I couldn't give you a number, but most of the arid cities have been altered. I think that would be a great analysis to see pre-colonialization, how these cities operated. I had a picture that I took out of my presentation of Cairo, for example, of old Cairo and new Cairo. And you can see this completely, the shift between practices of urbanization and how the approach of the city has changed once, these massive development strategies that were coming from, you could say, an idea of like European cities, right? On top of these African cities. So, but I don't know if it has to be undone. I think it needs to be acknowledged. And I think it needs to be arid design to be successful. It has to look to the landscape, like absolutely 1000%. If it's not looking to the ecology of the landscape and the systems that are inherent in the landscape, then it won't be successful.
Could I ask you a question related to this previous question?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, some of your ideas really threw me off because I had a pretty cynical view of deserts.
Mm-hmm.
I briefly studied permaculture, where there are some people using more nature-based, holistic methods to try to green the desert. One person I heard about is, I think he's Australian, named Geoff Lawton. He's been going to different countries and greening the desert. So based on what you presented, what's your view on these types of activities? Because the way they presented, it's always presented as a unanimously positive thing they're doing for these nations or these neighborhoods.
This is a great question. And something that has come up in my research a lot are these, like, for example, the Great Green Wall across the entire continent of Africa, right? That is spanning the Sahara Desert. And the initiative is to green the desert to stop the effects of desertification. And what's happening is these massive planting regimes of monocultural vegetation is being applied to a landscape that can't support it, right? And on a social and cultural level, right, who's being impacted by these massive planting regimes? Like, where's the water coming from? Where's the water being taken from? Who's maintaining these large infrastructures, and who is actually benefiting, right? These are all questions that I think emerge when you start to look at these projects. And the other Great Green Wall project in China as well has similar problems, is that a lot of these multi-billion-dollar investments, the vegetation can't sustain itself, right? It's a desert, it's an arid climate, and you're planting forests, right? So there's, and why, right? The question of why are we planting forests? And a lot of people say, well, the indigenous or the native or the rural farmers don't know how to maintain the land, so therefore we need to, give them fertile ground. And I just think that the politics of it aren't looking at it from actually helping and supporting the people, but it's an industry of some sort. So anyway, I won't get into the politics of it, but yeah, no, I think it's a huge aspect of the situation.
Thank you.
Samantha, I have really enjoyed your talk and the topic specifically. Like you pointed out, like the awards go to traditional neighborhoods, areas, cities. What do you think? It definitely relates also to money. Like if you take, for example, an example like in Chicago River, it's downtown. Been there. I mean, it's almost, well, I wouldn't use these words, but it's pretty gentrified. What's happening there. So it relates to money. And of course, if you want to have a great firm or good firm working in different neighborhoods, well, some money, some different clients are needed, and clients with money.
True.
How do you think we can, like, what could be measures to kind of turn this around?
I don't know. I don't know how we funnel investments to the people, right? To the people who need it. I don't know how that happens. That's a whole nother level of the world we live in right now. But I think, I mean, it's actually something I hadn't considered, and to think about the investments behind these projects. And I think looking at, maybe doing a further dive into seeing the clientele of these projects that are winning and the goals and objectives of those, I think could be just another layer for us to look at, who's funding our designed landscapes, right? Who's funding them, and does that have another, something to be revealed there? Probably yes. So actually, thank you for that, because that's a good question.
Thank you.
So I think we have maybe one more minute for maybe one more question before we close up for today, if there's any more questions out there. No.
That's
all right. Can I throw one in before we close out?
Jamie.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Hi, Samantha. I'm Jamie.
Hi.
Welcome. I'm glad you're here. I got to see your talk in the spring and was really inspired by the work you do. I'm a departmental pain in the ass. I try to help everybody. I'm working as a TA, and I'm here to help out, but I'm also like the person who keeps asking the social justice questions over and over, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this? Like with the ASLA awards, the day before they came out, they sent out a thing saying we support diversity, and then the awards came out and there wasn't a person of color in the awards. And I was kind of a vocal critic of like, what are we doing? So I think your work really helps us to see, to make that understandable and kind of see those disparities in a really understandable way. And I think that's really important, that we communicate better where the disparities are. So I'm going to be really brave and say one of the things I really want the department and the school in general to do, and the world to do, is better representation of queer identity and trans identity. And if you're open to it, I would love to chat with you later about ways to add other gendered people to your maps.
Yes, and this is great. That I would love to do this, because this was brought up to me and my partner TJ as well. And the leaders at WXLA also understand that it's not women as a W, right? Maybe we come up with something else, right? That it's more than just women, and how do we be more inclusive to all gender identities? So I would love to, yes, talk to you about this as well, because I think what's the problem, even just in the information that I am mapping now, is getting that information, right? Finding that information was very difficult. And even then it was like hours and hours scouring the internet and just like making spreadsheets, right? So maybe there's some opportunity here for us to start demanding a better collection of data, right? And I think once we have a better collection and we're asking more questions and, disseminating it to wider audiences, then we can start to have those conversations and represent them. Oh, great. But yeah, email me.
Thanks. I think that's great. I will email you. And then Robert, I have a question that's related, which is, we've all talked about all these cool things going on. Is there a way for us to share those resources with each other?
There's different ways we can share them. One is you can send them to the office and we can sort of send them back out, if that's probably the best way to do it, you think, to get those resources together. I think that's what we can do. And I also want to respond to a lot of things I heard from the students as well as Samantha. It's an incredible talk. I want to sort of give her a round of applause first before I start going to my, right? We're so wonderful to have her here. And one of the initiatives, in response to a lot of the events of the summers, is the department is doing a self-evaluation on how we deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so for the students and faculty, obviously, as well as alumni, we'd love to get you involved as we move forward with that. We're just in initial stages of planning, but to get dialogues going about what people consider to be the main issues and how do we move forward with proactive actions within our own department. So stay tuned for more information on that. And this was a great talk to kind of set us off in that direction. So I want to thank Samantha for that. Frank, do you want me to announce next week's talk to sort of get people? Okay, so next week we have Tracy Corley from Mass Inc. And her talk is From Engagement to Empowerment, Making the Switch to Community-Centered Planning. So great kind of follow up on the planning realm about doing community-centered planning. And Mass Inc. Helps do urban development work in many cities around. So I want to thank you all for zooming in, and Samantha's contact information is there if folks want to send her emails for further questions and things.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
And I'll share a screenshot of where the video recording will be. So it's also in the chat room. So please go to this website. It'll probably be tomorrow to see the video that will be uploaded. I'll stop recording. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Nathan.